The prairie stretched endlessly, the autumn wind bending tall grass as if the land itself were sighing. In the small town of Dry Creek, whispers traveled faster than horses. News had spread that young Clara Mayfield, just 18, had been given to Samuel Carter, a widowed rancher nearly twice her age. Samuel was a man of silence, his skin weathered by sun and sorrow, his eyes carrying the weight of too many losses. His wife had died 3 winters ago, leaving him with 3 children: Luke, 12, stubborn as the mule he often rode; Annie, 9, sweet but fragile, who still cried herself to sleep; and little Thomas, only 4, who clung to his mother's memory like a ghost that never left the ranch. Clara's family, deep in debt after her father's gambling ruined their farm, had decided her fate without asking her. She was innocent, as the townsfolk liked to say, a girl who had never even held a boy's hand, now handed over to a man she barely knew. The wedding had been small, quick, and without joy. Samuel stood tall, but somber, speaking his vows with the stiffness of a man fulfilling a duty rather than grasping a gift. Clara's voice trembled, her hands clutching her dress as though it were the only anchor she had left. When the ceremony ended, the whispers began. "Poor girl," murmured Mrs. Higgins, the baker's wife. "He needs a mother for those children, that's all," another woman said. "Still," added the blacksmith, "it's a strange thing, marrying a child to a man with so much sorrow in his eyes." Clara moved to the ranch that evening, her heart heavy. The wide, weathered house smelled of wood smoke, leather, and faint sorrow. She unpacked her small bundle of clothes into a cedar chest while Samuel showed her the rooms. His manner was polite, almost distant, as though he, too, were uncertain what to make of this union. The children reacted differently. Luke glared at her with suspicion, arms crossed. Annie studied her curiously, as if deciding whether this new woman was friend or foe. Little Thomas, however, clutched Clara's skirt almost immediately, whispering, "Are you going to be Mama now?" Clara's throat tightened. She bent down and stroked his hair, whispering, "No one can replace your Mama, but I'll do my best to take care of you." That night, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the moonlight through the window. Samuel entered, quiet as ever, and told her she needn't worry. He expected nothing from her beyond tending the house and children. His words carried both mercy and coldness, leaving Clara uncertain whether to feel relieved or unwanted. Days turned into weeks. Clara learned to cook for 5, to mend clothes, and to rise before dawn to gather eggs. The children slowly adjusted to her presence. Annie began following her around, eager to help with baking. Thomas would not sleep unless Clara sang him a lullaby. Luke, however, remained defiant, sneering whenever Clara tried to guide him. "You ain't my mama," he snapped one afternoon, slamming the door. Clara swallowed her hurt and answered softly, "No, I'm not. But I care about you, Luke. You'll see." Samuel watched all this with a quiet intensity. Though he rarely spoke more than necessary, Clara noticed him lingering at the doorway when she read stories to the children. Once, she caught him staring at her while she kneaded bread, his expression unreadable. Winter arrived early that year, fierce and merciless. One night, a blizzard howled across the plains. The ranch grew cold despite the fire. Annie began coughing, a deep, rattling sound that grew worse by the hour. Clara stayed at her bedside, wiping her brow, whispering prayers into the storm. Samuel rode through the storm to fetch the doctor, returning frostbitten and near collapse. The doctor shook his head gravely. "Pneumonia. The child's weak. She may not last the week." Clara refused to give up. She brewed teas, wrapped Annie in warm blankets, and sat by her side through endless nights. Samuel watched in silence, torn between despair and a strange, growing admiration for the girl he'd been given. On the 5th night, Annie opened her eyes and whispered, "Clara." "Yes, sweetheart," Clara said, brushing the girl's damp hair from her forehead. You feel like Mama." Tears stung Clara's eyes. She kissed Annie's hand and whispered, "Rest now. I'm right here." By morning, Annie's fever had broken. The household, once steeped in grief, breathed again. Samuel placed a rough, calloused hand on Clara's shoulder and said simply, "You saved her." It was the first time his voice carried warmth. The town, however, still whispered. They had expected Clara to fail, to return home broken. Instead, she seemed to grow stronger. And Samuel, once withdrawn, now seemed almost protective of her. But not everyone approved. One Sunday after church, Mrs. Higgins cornered Clara. "Child," she said with a sniff, "you're too young to be raising another woman's children. Folks say it ain't proper." Clara lifted her chin, her voice steady for the first time. "Maybe it ain't proper, but those children need me, and I won't walk away." Samuel, overhearing, gave Clara a long, searching look. Something was changing between them, something neither had expected. And what happened next would stun the whole town. What no one expected. The thaw of spring brought more than just green pastures. It brought whispers of change inside the Carter Ranch. Clara, once timid, now carried herself with quiet strength. She managed the home with grace, cared for the children with devotion, and even earned a reluctant respect from Luke, who one day surprised her by asking for help fixing a saddle. "You're good at things," he muttered awkwardly. "Better than I thought." But the town remained skeptical. Some claimed Clara was only biding her time until she escaped. Others whispered she would never be a true wife to Samuel. One fateful afternoon, Dry Creek was rattled by news. Bandits had raided a nearby farm. The men stole cattle, burned a barn, and left families trembling. Fear spread quickly. Samuel prepared to guard his ranch, oiling his rifle, teaching Luke how to handle a pistol. Clara, though frightened, refused to cower. She locked windows, kept lamps low at night, and whispered courage to the children. The attack came under a moonless sky. Shouts rang out. Horses thundered across the pasture, and flames licked the edge of the barn. Samuel fired warning shots, standing firm like a wall against the darkness. Clara, clutching Thomas, prayed with all her might. Then, suddenly, Luke darted outside, determined to help his father. Clara didn't think. She followed, grabbing the shotgun Samuel had left by the door. For a moment, she stood in the icy night air, fear clawing at her chest. One of the bandits charged towards Samuel with a knife. Without hesitation, Clara raised the shotgun and fired. The blast echoed. The man fell, and silence followed. Samuel turned, his face pale with shock, not at the danger, but at Clara's courage. The bandits fled, scattering into the night. The ranch was saved, but the story traveled faster than the wind. By morning, all of Dry Creek knew. The 18-year-old girl, once dismissed as fragile, had stood her ground and defended her family. When the townsfolk saw her walk into church the following Sunday, children clinging to her hands and Samuel walking beside her, they did not whisper with pity anymore. They whispered with awe. Mrs. Higgins, the same woman who had scorned Clara before, approached her with wide eyes. "Child, you're no child at all. You're stronger than most women twice your age." Clara only smiled faintly. "I just did what I had to." But the greatest change was in Samuel. He no longer looked at Clara with distance, but with a deep, quiet respect that bordered on reverence. One evening, as the sun bled red across the plains, he finally spoke words he'd been holding back. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "I thought you were just a girl forced into a burden you didn't deserve. But you've given these children more than I ever could. You've given me more than I thought I'd ever have again." Clara's heart raced. She met his eyes, seeing not just sorrow anymore, but hope. "And you've given me a family when I thought I'd lost mine," she whispered. He took her hand gently, not as a man claiming what was given, but as a man choosing and being chosen. For the first time since her marriage, Clara felt truly seen. The ranch thrived that summer. The children laughed again, chasing calves and playing in the fields. Luke, once rebellious, now worked beside Samuel with pride. Annie grew stronger, and Thomas, never far from Clara's side, called her Mama without hesitation. The town's whispers changed. No longer pity, no longer doubt, only astonishment. Who would have believed that an 18-year-old girl, handed over like a burden, would become the heart of a family, the strength of a ranch, and the woman who breathed life back into a widowed man's soul. What had begun as an arrangement born of desperation had turned into something far greater, something that stunned everyone who witnessed it. And on one quiet evening, as fireflies danced over the fields, Samuel pulled Clara close and whispered, "I reckon God knew what he was doing when he sent you here." Clara smiled, her eyes glistening in the twilight. For the first time since leaving her child at home, she no longer felt given away. She felt chosen.